This meeting is being recorded.
Oh, that's two different ones. I ain't never seen two different ones. I guess I can cut that out. All right, guys. Welcome back to another episode of Phenomenal Conversations, Mr. Short. I hadn't done one of these in a little bit, so I'm excited to do another one with Dr. Marie Heath. How you doing, Dr. Heath?
I'm doing excellent. Thank you. It's a great time of the year.
Yes, it is. Everybody gets a break. So just to start off, Dr. Marie Heath is a consultant and she's still working at the district level. So we talked about that beforehand. I thought maybe it was a mistake when I looked on her resume, but I was like, oh, wow, she's still doing both, because most people don't do both, especially working at that high level and still, are consultants that are known. So we're going to get a little bit into that, but we're going to start off just by asking. So Dr. Heath, how did you kind of get your career started in education? What kind of made you want to become an educator?
Well, I definitely don't have the traditional, story that you hear from most educators where you had a teacher who influenced you. So I didn't start that way. And sometimes I'll just share that, that's one of the hardest activities whenever I go to trainings and they say, okay, think about the teacher that supported you or the one who inspired you. That's not how I started. So Mr. Short and I talked a little bit about my past, and my educational upbringing was quite different, but I would have to say what inspired me was my kids. And so my background, it didn't have I didn't have a strong educational background, but when I started having kids and put them in the school system and realized like I need to be there for my kids. And so back in 1990, I started going to school whenever I had my first 3 kids were born, and I just never stopped. And so the educational career started because I started substituting in the school where they went to school and became a instructional aide, and then just took off from there.
Wow. That's pretty amazing. So let's talk about getting that first job as an educator. And obviously you're already, because if you go, I guess, the traditional route, you go to school, and most of the time you may even start your career without even having any children, maybe not even being married. So you kind of start off already having responsibilities. So talk about kind of starting your educational career and already having responsibilities of kids to take care of.
That's correct. Yeah, it definitely was something very different. It seemed like all along the way there was barriers, but I just continued to plow through. So by the time I had graduated, I graduated non-cert, which, that placed a barrier, because at that time, by the time I graduated, I had 6 kids. And
wow.
I had 6 kids, and I just wasn't able to student teach full time. And so I graduated non-cert and then started my master's program and got my certification through a baccalaureate program.
So you went to master's. Okay. I guess I was wondering about the gap. That make a lot more sense now. All right. Yeah. So it seems like when I was looking at your resume, it seems like you kind of immediately, even though I guess working in the classroom is one thing, but you started kind of on the district or working at a, leadership route immediately. So what kind of went into you kind of jumping into that pretty quick?
Well, I started working with adults first. So when I wasn't hired to become a teacher, after I graduated in 2001, I wasn't hired because I didn't have my certification, but I was hired at a community college. So I started teaching there first. And then I also was hired at another community college as their ESL coordinator. So I started as an ESL teacher and became the ESL coordinator. So I was kind of juggling those 2 part-time jobs and had the opportunity to work with adults for a few years. And then in 2005 is when I was hired on full-time as an ESL teacher, and I was an ESL newcomer teacher. So I did that for quite a few years. And you kind of, after you've been in education for a while, then you move into department head, and then you move into curriculum writer and things like that. Left that role and moved into a specialist position, and from a specialist position then into a coordinator position with the district that I'm with right now.
So why go from working adults to working, even though it seems like your initial passion was essentially to work at the lower levels, I guess it's the K through 12 level. What kind of, after you start working with adults, to want to go back and work with kids instead of working with adults, since that's how you started?
Well, that was always my goal. My goal was always to work with the children, but working with the adults first, that was an opportunity. But working with the adults first, I think it gave me an interesting perspective a parent's perspective. So I was a parent of kids who were in the educational system. And then I worked with adults who had kids in the educational system. So, I could hear some of their struggles, working with immigrant parents and hearing their struggles of how they were having difficulty accessing our educational system and the communication barriers and things like that. So I think that was just kind of like a godsend that I had that background going into the school district and working with the kids. So because of that foundation, I was able to integrate some of my parent programs and my communications with them because I had that background.
All right. So one of the things I thought was impressive as far as like, it seems like you definitely wanted to go into the curriculum area, and I guess that's what you end up going into. So why did you kind of have a heart to do curriculum? It seems like, I guess, based off your background, you may just want to work with the kids and things like that, but it seems like curriculum is that's my jam, honestly, too. But why did you decide to just go into the area of curriculum, but what you wanted to do?
Well, I think where that started was, and most ESL teachers will agree with this statement, is that seems to be the area, the department that's not fully formed. Mm-hmm. And it's probably because we just don't have, it's not a large department usually. We don't have the manpower to have people at the district level to sit and write curriculum all the time. And so ESL teachers find themselves creating their own curriculum a lot of the times. And then the district that I worked in, my original district, they always provided opportunities to train us on curriculum writing and to pay us to write the curriculum for the district. And so, anyone who has had the opportunity to write curriculum, it's kind of like, you catch that bug and you just stay with it. And so that's what my master's was in curriculum instruction. And so having that deeper understanding of, how does this work systematically, and how do we, have that congruency between curriculum instruction and assessment, and to be able to create that and then see the implementation of it, it's very rewarding. As you well know, it's very rewarding.
Oh yeah, when you come up with something as far as how you structure things, and then students are able to be successful because of something you came up with, that's always it's just a very fun thing. They ain't saying you don't want to use somebody else's stuff, but if you can create something, you see students grow from it, yeah, that definitely is pretty awesome. So also you kind of have the dual thought process of being a curriculum person, but also seem to have a heart for leadership as well, which is kind of like, I have a bit of a sports background. I was a sports writer before. It seems like, say, I went to Mississippi State. Our coach is a guy named Mike Leach. He actually just recently passed away, but he's an offensive guy. Most time offensive coaches, which I guess in teaching would be like, I guess the curriculum people, they tend to not care for, I guess, leadership or the minutia. So how is it that you love curriculum, but at the same time, you seem to have a heart for leadership as well? How did you kind of mesh the two?
I think in education, it's all one large system. Like, I haven't seen that it's all separate. Once you get up to the district level, you realize it's one large machine that all works together. So if you wanted to work well, I couldn't do anything that I do without having a good relationship with all the leaders on campus, because, I can work with a teacher and I can help support a teacher, but that doesn't improve the system. So anytime a systematic change happens, you're working with the leadership, you're working within systems. And so to me, it just goes hand in hand. It's not separate.
Okay. So obviously, I mean, we talked beforehand, so I kind of have a little bit of understanding why you take a serious stock in being a learner, but I was like, man, she goes to school. Like, so why have you taken, I guess we kind of answered it beforehand, but for the listeners to understand, like, why did you take learning so seriously? Obviously you're somebody that's teaching and expecting others to learn, but why do you take learning so seriously?
I think there's a personal and professional response to that. So professionally, I think that all educators are lifelong learners, whether it's in a structured institution or we're constantly reaching out to other educators, listening to podcasts and things like that. So it's rare to find an educator that's not a lifelong learner. And then to be in a structured institute, I think that probably goes back to exactly what you were talking about. We had a little bit of opportunity to touch bases before the interview. And I shared with you, being a second generation immigrant, it was very difficult to toggle the educational world, having my mother from another country and not having access to all of the resources that are available within the school system, and not being very successful. And so I ended up not finishing school and dropping out. And at the time, when you're 16 and you drop out, you're just focused on getting by, trying to figure out how to make a living, thinking you can take on the world and you don't need to be in the educational environment. You can do this on your own. But it's interesting, children kind of change your heart. And so when I started having kids and realized this is a really important part of life to be educated and, to be a parent who supports their kids so they have access to all of the programs and all of the activities and all the educational opportunities. I just thought, I don't want my kids to see me as a high school dropout. Like, that's not a good role model. I don't want to be another statistic. And so I thought, I can start small. I'll just go to community college and start taking some developmental classes and get my GED, and just started really from below ground level, right? And I just, I guess I realized that I love to learn. I may not have liked school, but I love to learn. And so I just stayed. I stayed and stayed and stayed. And so I graduated with my doctorate this year in 2022. So between 1990 and 2022, I had very few years I was not in taking some kind of a class.
So I guess I wasn't add this question. So do people I guess I didn't know that about you. When you tell people kind of your background and your story, are they almost sometimes amazed? Because I mean, I come from a family as well where people kind of didn't have the traditional route, and you might be like, wow, y'all did all that. So how is it, that you started from there and now you're a doctorate, obviously a person that's very important, not only in your district, but, developing a voice, I guess, in the multilingual world?
I think that people are most surprised at 2 high school dropouts. And I was a teenage pregnant, we talked a little bit about some of the statistics of our second, third generation immigrants that they're more at risk. And so I definitely was a product of that. And I think the story of, being a young teenage mom, getting married so young and having a difficult life and having 7 kids, that is probably what people say, oh, wow, that's huge, to have 7 kids, let alone
yeah, that's
life. Oh my gosh.
No matter when you had them, that's just a lot in general.
Yeah, but it really wasn't for anybody other than fulfilling something within myself.
Awesome.
And also being that role model for my kids. So I thought if they saw me working hard and the value of education, but really they look at me and say, please don't take another class. You're not going to take another class, are you? So they're happy. It did have an ending. I mean, not that I won't ever take another class again, but for sure, very proud of that long road, and they do understand the value of education. And
I think they at least know they need to graduate from high school. I'll say that much. I think they know that.
Yeah.
All right. So I had a chance to see your, I think actually wasn't the whole presentation. I think about half of it I'm going blank already. Seesaw. Yeah, I'm with. Oddly enough, even I'm going to a couple conferences this year. I think they're all running together now in my head. And you presented on social emotional learning, which obviously is becoming a big focus in education. So you spoke a little bit about, I guess I can kind of glean, why it's important to you, but to speak about the importance of social emotional learning, why that's important in education.
Well, it's huge. SEL is huge right now in education, but I'll tell you, it's an area that's not really charted for our newcomers. And so, there's a program, every district has an SEL program, but it was developed around the dominant English speaking group, right? And it wasn't created for our kids they're second language learners, who are immigrants, who have a completely different lifestyle. It doesn't fit for them. And so I started when I was in the classroom, recognizing that and working with my kids, because kids who are immigrants, they come with all kinds of just trauma, stressors. It's a huge transitional period. And I clearly understood that. I could clearly see that there needed to be some additional supports beyond language and academics. And so this is a project I've been working on for well more than a decade. And I've had the opportunity, now that I'm a curriculum coordinator, to start playing with, okay, what would it look like as a fully developed course? a program, not like a summertime program, not where it's implemented partially in the classroom, but an actual credit-bearing course. And so probably for about 5 years, I've been working on developing the course. This year I submitted, I don't know if you knew this or not, but I submitted a proposal to TEA as an innovative course. And so in spring, I'll find out if that was accepted. Years ago, it was probably about 5 years ago, there used to be an innovative course called social intelligence that basically it was, to support the SEL of our immigrant students. And I utilized that to run a pilot program and develop the curriculum all along the way. And so the thinking behind that is that there is a time and a space that's developed and created specifically for our immigrant kids to process all of these changes, and for there to be explicit teaching on some of the social norms. Like, what are the social, there's such a big difference for some of our cultures. The dissonance is huge. And so they just need to know, like, why are kids dressed like this? What is that big flower mum thing that kids are wearing during homecoming? Like, what is that about? The simplest things, that there's not a time and place for kids to process all of these things. And so the curriculum was developed like that, where it's a progressive, like when you first get here, some of our kids don't know technology. They don't know how to utilize it. They don't know how to log in. They need another password. And so they're flying by the seat of their pants whenever they get into their content classes, and the teachers don't really have time to explain the meaning of things or explain the why behind behaviors or cultures or technology or, things like that.
Yeah, I know, like, it's weird. I went on a mission trip to Mexico, and even I was a fully grown man, but I think I was even in my late 20s then. It was about 8 years ago, I think now. But I went there and I was like, man, I was kind of amazed because, one thing was the first thing they ate later, like at 3 o'clock, and then late at 9. I mean, I'm pushing bedtime right now during the school year, like to go to sleep at around 9 o'clock. And then eating, I normally eat at noon. So that was kind of different for me, just something simple. That's small, but, just where you eat, time you eat. But even the weirdest thing, I remember I was like, I told him, like, I guess everybody's very affectionate in Mexico as compared to America. I was like, man, what is this? I was like, yeah, it's kind of like, so I'd imagine as a child coming somewhere to America and we do things completely different. I imagine it would probably throw them through a loop if they don't know how to process the information. So
to have all of them come together. So if you can imagine, most newcomer classes have a blend. Sometimes we have a high population of our Latinx students, but then also we have students from all over the world. But to have them come together and just talk about the cultural differences, that awareness alone is so very powerful, and it helps in that transition adjustment period. And so that not only have I submitted that course to TEA, and we'll find out if TEA approves that, but I also, that's my book that I'm working on. So the training that you went to was a tiny piece of what it might look like in the classroom.
Awesome. I mean, it was pretty good. I think I was on there about 20 or 30 minutes, but it was pretty cool. I think you even had it where students would just write out the things they know on a hand, or things, things that come to mind. I thought that was pretty cool. So I guess that's a natural segue. So you started, because I enough when I first looked at it, I thought maybe you were just purely just a Seidlitz consultant, but you're doing both dual roles. So how did that kind of come about? Because most of the people that do work for John Seidlitz, who, for the people who are listening, may not be from Texas, he's kind of considered one of the foremost person when it comes to ESL multilingual learners here in Texas. So talk about how that came about to work for him and to still kind of have that dual role working at the higher up at the district level.
Right, sure. Okay, so I met John back whenever his company was brand new, and I was still a teacher, and I was going to some of the Seidlitz trainings whenever it was just him. The company was really small. And so, the Seidlitz team is the most amazing team and we all know this. It's an amazing team. So if you ever have them come to your district, they create lifelong friendships all across the country. And so you get to know their Seidlitz team. So through the years, I just went to lots of trainings. Well, then when I came to this district, and as a curriculum coordinator, I was able to hire them and then provide those trainings for our teachers here. And so through the years, I would have the Seidlitz team come in and give all the different kinds of trainings. And then I also had presented different conferences that John was at, and he had seen me present, and I presented at his What's Working, TESOL, and all kinds of different conferences. But I think probably what caused them to reach out. So Seidlitz, they don't have, people are always looking like, where can I apply? How can I work for the team? So they don't advertise that, but they tend to handpick. I hope I can say this, but they tend to, reach out to people that they feel like would make a good fit. And there's a good niche right there where it would help to, add to their company. And so he was very aware of the work that I was doing with immigrant kids and all of the SEL work and building the course and things like that. So they were in the process of putting together their newcomer division. And so as soon as I had graduated, then they had reached out and we had some conversations, and I was blessed and honored to be asked to be one of their consultants.
Awesome. So how's it doing both dual roles? Because obviously working at the district level is very challenging in and of itself. It's essentially a year-round job, except for probably these little dead periods right now. So how is it doing that, but at the same time having the responsibility of consultants? You don't just not just sitting in the house somewhere. You kind of have to go do presentations and things of that sort. So how's it kind of doing both? How do you balance both of those?
Yeah, the juggling it's been interesting. I think that, the timing has been really good for me because in my role, I don't have summers off. I don't, I have to work during spring break. I work year round with very little time off. But with that being said, we have PTO. And so the PTO, those days belong to me. And so I'm able to, work a second job because of that. So just really trying to manage my time carefully, and lots of late night flights and coming in tired. But anything that you love and you're passionate about, you're energized, and I don't know, you're able to drum up all that extra energy to keep on going. So it's the passion that drives us, right?
So it definitely does. So how do you kind of keep a fresh mindset? And I call it keeping a rookie mindset, as far as like being in a role like that. I mean, essentially you're writing curriculum, but no one isn't always thinking that you're coming up with something new because you're not in the classroom. Because I've always felt like a lot of my ideas come from just working with students, and it's not just me magically coming up with the stuff. So how do you kind of keep things fresh, even though you're not directly working with the students anymore?
I love that question. And so I had an administrator when I was a teacher at one of the campuses I worked at, and I was working on my principal certification. And every year he would take 1 week and go back into the classroom because he didn't want to be so disconnected, that he needed to be able to say, I still teach, I'm still in there, I can still feel it. And I think that's really important. So this year I have gone back into the classroom. And there's a group we have a special program in this district that we work with our overage undercredit students. And they come in, and so usually on Thursdays, I'll go in and teach one class. It's an hour and a half long. And so I can apply all the strategies and build the curriculum for that particular class. So I think that has been one of the most powerful things that I've done, is because you're exactly right. There's a lot of benefits in that. Not only do I keep myself fresh, and so if I have some strategies that I need to implement as an educator myself, I also can talk to other educators as colleagues and as a peer and say, oh, with my students, this is what I did. Here's the writing piece that we co-created. So I can speak to that. And so I think it's really important. I think, if you've been out of the classroom for a long period of time, it's really important to find a way and a place to get back into the classroom and continue to hone your skills. So
I guess my question would be too, what was I about to say? I guess now that we're talking about ESLs and curriculum, keeping things fresh, transition a little bit into, you spoke about second and third, I guess, generation ESLs. Why is it so much of a challenge for them? And we spoke a little bit about this off air beforehand, but why is it such a challenge for them? And because most people would think that the first generations would have trouble, but according to what you were talking about beforehand, they actually do better. So why are the second and third generation ESLs doing a little bit worse?
I think that's a great question. And so it's something that I'm still continuing to pull a lot of research on. But when I was working on my dissertation, I did come across some research that talks about our second and third generation immigrants, that they are performing worse than the first generation, and they're more at risk. And so I found that intriguing, and I wanted to see if there was a correlation to, okay, is this why they're in the ESL program for such a long time? Like, do these at-risk behaviors, like what type of at-risk behaviors is it that may be contributing to being in the program for a long time? And so looking at that, I saw some longitudinal data that showed, you know, by your second and third generation, you have kids who academically, they start performing less. They are more at risk for dropping out, teenage pregnancy, at-risk behaviors. And so I found that really intriguing and wanted to know the why behind it. Like, why is this happening? Because your first generation immigrants, they come here for, you know, the opportunity. So parents come here and, you know, I don't know if you know this or not, but if a child comes here and they're in elementary, or if they come here before they go to school, they're a 1.5. I don't know if you've ever heard that before. They're considered a 1.5. They're not first generation, not second generation. So if they have all of their education here in the US, they're considered 1.5. So they tend to do pretty good. But then, you know, you look at the second, third generation that, like, why are they more at risk? And so what I discovered, and I am a second generation myself, and I definitely fell into that at-risk population. I didn't perform well in school. I had a lot of absenteeism. I was a teenage pregnant mother, and then also I dropped out of school. So I was a perfect example of what went wrong. And so I just kind of took my own life experiences, took the research, and realized there is an identity struggle with our second, third generation. When you have one culture at home and another culture at school, you're always trying to figure out where you fit in. And I can give you several examples. So here's a couple of examples. When I was young, my mother had another baby. I remember being in 4th grade, and she had an injury. She broke her ankle. Well, she pulled me out of school for 2 weeks, and I was pulled out of education for 2 weeks because I had to stay home and take care of my baby brother. Well, that was normal for her. Like, that's what you do. The older brothers take care of the younger siblings. I did a lot of caretaking so she could go to work. So it was a very difficult life because she came here, married an American soldier, had 3 kids, and then he left us. So she had never worked before. She was still learning the language. And, you know, that throws you into a downward spiral of poverty. And then you're in survival mode all of the time. So a lot of our obligation had to do with at home, taking care of each other and cleaning and cooking and helping to support the family, just the existence. There was never any time where she was at the school. She didn't know how to navigate the educational system. Okay. So a lot of times that's where we find we fall short in the educational system, is that our immigrant families, unless there is a support system to reach out and to invite them into that environment, it's very unfamiliar. So that just means, okay, I wasn't in Girl Scouts, I didn't go to the camps, I didn't play sports, I wasn't in band. Well, we know what happens to students who are not involved in school, right? If that's not part of your community and you don't belong there, you're not going to be successful there. And so if you look at our long-term ELs, one of the things that we've discovered is they are not participating in the school activities, in the school environment. And so we're constantly trying to figure out, like, how can we pull them in? Like, what clubs can we invite them into? How can we get them into sports? How can we bring them in? Because it's a different environment, a different culture. And so when kids are toggling between 2 different cultures, you go home and you have one set of expectations, and then you go to school, you constantly feel like you don't fit in anywhere. So anytime you have identity crisis, you tend to withdraw, or sometimes you may get caught up in risky behaviors, or, you know, maybe some emotional distresses. Everybody has to have a sense of belonging. That's just in our human nature. Everybody has to. And so this is a connection that I found is, okay, this is starting to all make sense. All these pieces are starting to come together of no wonder our kids may not be as successful as they could be, is if they're constantly toggling between the 2. You know, we send home all kinds of notices to our families saying, oh, we've got this family night, we have this going on at school, that going on at school. And if those documents go home, even if they're translated, it's so foreign to our families that maybe have a different language and a different culture. I couldn't have ever seen my mother herself coming to school, like never, ever, because it was a different, a group of people. Like she didn't know the system.
Wow. I would say that was a mouthful, but I mean, I work at a school. Most of the kids are Hispanic, so they kind of give me a little insight into what, a lot of the kids may be dealing with. Because that's one of the things we say I say at my school, one of the best things sometimes is that parents don't complain, but one of the worst things is that they don't complain. So it's kind of, I feel it's almost a good thing if parents, because that means they're involved. Now, it can be annoying, obviously, as an educator. And I'm sure at the district level when people are always complaining or got some issue, but you kind of want them at least paying attention to what's going on. So going with that, what have you found is the biggest challenge for teachers working with ESLs? Obviously, someone like yourself who went to school for it and has a heart for working with ESLs. What has been the biggest challenge for teachers trying to reach their ESLs, especially say if they don't come from the background?
Right. And I don't think, this is a different topic for discussion, but I am a firm believer that, you don't have to have the same cultural background or the same language to be an outstanding ESL teacher. But it does take a lot of continued research, and you have to learn. I was constantly, if I had a new student come in from another culture, I immediately was trying to gather all the background information so that, I could better understood how to serve my students. But I kind of look at it this way, Jeremiah. I look at teachers who teach newcomer students are classified differently than teachers who teach long-term ELs. It's a whole different skill set. This is the way I think of it, is a whole different skill set. I even give different trainings. And so I always need to know, are you a newcomer teacher? Are you working with immigrant kids? Or are you a teacher who works with long-term ELs? Because, your first generation, your second, third generation, you need to have a different skill set. So for example, our newcomer teachers, we're constantly working on how to connect with them culturally, how to build language, how to get them involved, how to help them through the adjustment period. So we do work a lot on the SEL piece of that, social, cultural, and emotional piece of it. And then teachers who are working with our long-term ELs, that's a completely different skill set as well. And I would say the number one challenge is the students who are what I call the invisible silent students. Those are the ones who are just there. They come every day. There are not red flags there other than the fact is, well, their grades aren't as good as they could be, and they're in the program for a long, long time. And, they're still here year after year after year, still in the ESL newcomer program. And I think sometimes we don't see that as a red flag. We're focusing so much on, well, put them in intervention. Well, let's find some strategy to build academic language. But I don't think that teachers understand that is a red flag for a student who says, I'm not quite sure I belong here. Where is my place? And so I encourage teachers to take a step back and look at the whole child. Is this child involved with the community? Or is a student just showing up every day and you see him as an unsuccessful student? And so I think the key to that is really asking teachers to take a step back and seeing how can I help this child to feel like you belong here, you're part of the community. Because a lot of times the parents, when they go home, their parents don't speak English and they don't have the understanding of how to navigate the educational system. I remember in fifth grade, everybody that I knew of went to camp. That was a big thing. I don't know if it's across Texas, but it was in this North Texas area. In fifth grade, you go to camp for 3 days. And that was like one of the biggest educational opportunities that you have. And everybody talked about that. That was so foreign to my mom, to go sleep somewhere with your school. Like that was never going to happen.
Oh, God.
But I think so you miss out on like one of those milestones in your educational career when everybody's off to Camp Goddard and you're, one of the 3 kids sitting in class by yourself because your parents don't know what that's all about.
Well, and I guess I've seen that too. I think I remember I was working with a student a couple of years ago, and this was during the pandemic, and I was working with him at home, and I think the story I gave them was dealing with camping, and I was like, man, when I was a kid, I didn't go camping myself until I was a grown man, like literal grown man, not 21, maybe 27 or 28. I didn't go camping myself. So, and a lot of kids from my background, they probably didn't, where I was from. So, and it would have thought I would have, because I was from like a little small country town. You'd have thought I went camping or something. But I was like, man, imagine how many kids actually don't deal with that, or kids that, I think I did something earlier this year dealing with inferencing, and the kids didn't know what walking down the aisle meant. They said, a bunch of them said they had never been to a wedding. Now, they were only 8 or 9, but I was like, man, you never been to a wedding? I mean, you think you just was there, at one, but there's a lot of kids that don't deal with that. So that's an excellent point, kind of, because there's so many other components. I guess that's why they say teaching can be so difficult, because it's not as simple as just getting there teaching the content. That's the only part of the battle, really. I mean, that's a big part of the battle. You do curriculum, so obviously you understand how important it is. So yes. So we covered a lot. A lot great stories. I mean, I'm almost like, man, I might have to put this one out earlier. This is some good stuff. Had to listen to a lot of good things from this. But so as far as now in your career, you kind of now been in a position now we have a lot of influence, and now whether it's working at the district level, being able to affect it from that standpoint, possibly a TEA thing of a new course, and then with Seidlitz. So where do you kind of see yourself in the next 5 years as far as what you want to be able to do now in education, especially considering your beginning and where you are now?
Oh, for sure. Working on my book, getting that finished. And I think the timing's going to be beautiful. Once the book comes out, and if TA approves the course, you'll have districts all across Texas who can look at implementing a course for their immigrant kids and receiving credit at the same time as when my book comes out. So I can see in the next 5 years having the opportunity to help support campuses to implement the program and work with their newcomer kids.
I almost think you maybe need to write a biography as well. I think that might be interesting in a couple of years, especially after you, I guess, firmly establish yourself with that. I was like, man, that's a good. I mean, I'm a writer myself, and I write about my life, so I was like, man, this is some good stuff. That'd be a great biography. I'll read that. So yeah. I guess we can end. I always like to end with advice, especially on my phenomenal conversations. And you already given a lot of great advice, but for anyone that's teaching ESLs or newcomers, what would be some advice that you would just give to any of those teachers who maybe are new to it or just kind of struggling learning how to do it?
Right. The advice I give to all of our ESL teachers is it's such an important role that they have. It's the hardest job they're ever going to love. And to continue to focus on the heart, you got to teach from the heart. This is what I tell our teachers is, if you get too caught up on the academics and the testing and building the language, and you're just so focused on that, it seems to increase the stress level. When you walk in every single day and you see your students, remind yourself they need you as a human first. And I give that grace and that space for our teachers to, if you have to have a day where you have to reconnect with the kids, to take a step back and take that pressure off of yourself and them, that's most important to them, because they're not going to, say, oh, I remember my teacher, she was amazing, she taught me how to multiply, she taught me this or that. We had a panel of former ESL students. I had them come and talk to our teachers earlier this year. And so they're all grown now, they're all professionals, they're doctors, teachers, they're very successful, and we set up a panel, and I just wanted them to tell the teachers, what is the most important thing? What advice can you give? Every single one of them had mentioned how, I remember when Miss Heath was our teacher, she loved us, she cared about us. That was the message. And so that's what I always carry, is that's number one, is the heart of what it is that you're doing.
Excellent. So, and I would concur with that, because the thing is, like that content stuff, it means something, I guess, and you want kids to learn something academically, but those kids will learn a lot faster. You love on them, and they know that you care about what they're doing. So I think that's excellent advice. So guys, I want to thank y'all for listening. This has been another episode of Phenomenal Conversation with Mr. Short with Dr. Marie Heath. I might have to put this one out a little early because this one's been pretty awesome. All right. Thank you guys for listening.